Wow, Dan, that was a crazy episode. We got an Italian that loves America. We got an Italian that hates America.
And we got a pretty big character death.
Yeah, this is a true podcast, and we're reviewing and recapping Fargo Season 4, Episode 5, entitled
The Birthplace of Civilization.
Tough episode, Daniel, today. But a very good episode, and we'll start at the beginning. I feel like this opening sequence in the jazz club was surprisingly, warm. Just the cinematography and everything going on there, juxtaposed with, cops beating Leon. Kind of a fun reveal. Josto and Gaetano are behind this. This is definitely a motif in this episode, is Loy is finally messing up. We've been talking about this for the last 3 weeks now. Loy had a pretty perfect streak going, and it is completely broken today. Chris Rock gives a great performance in this episode. Josto and Gaetano are somewhat on the same page. The first episode they're on the same page is when the cannons are getting absolutely destroyed. This is kind of a fun second scene after a pretty rough first scene. Also, Leon and all the cannons get arrested in the opening sequence. And then after that, there's a nice little Mort Kellerman just appearance. He was a very small part in season 2. We missed this last episode. They name dropped him, and someone commented last episode on it, so thank you for that. But yeah, it's kind of a fun little I think this is the only character that's going to reappear besides younger versions of some characters, and it completely makes sense, and it's in time. This is what I love about Fargo. We get little stories from this random Mort Kellerman character that we saw his death at the hands of young Dodd in season 2, and now we just kind of see an interaction he has with Loy.
Just cool. That's a moment where the connections between the different seasons isn't forced and obnoxious. It's just a thing. I mean, most people probably have no idea who that guy is, and it doesn't take away from the experience. It only enhances the experience if you know who it is. It was just a fun little thing for Fargo heads like us.
Surprisingly, the cops come and raid Loy also. This was a huge Otis episode. We get a lot of backstory. Loy knows about almost everyone in this town. He has done his research. He knows about Otis. He knows about Zelmar. And yeah, I really enjoyed that. Yeah, Otis was in the war. He was someone who had to scout for mines, which really just makes the whole character way more understandable.
Definitely makes sense for all of his nervous tics and his little quirks. And it's also important to note that Loy did not fight in the war. Loy was why would I fight for a country that is, doesn't care about me? Any time period, film or TV show that's set around World War II or Vietnam or something, everybody at some point talks about the war because it was just something that was so important to all of these people's lives. It was nice to have something about Otis, although I will say, we've joked about how Otis is basically just a noir detective, straight out of LA Noir. It's so on the nose at times. And him being from the war and what we learn later about his ex, it's crazy how noir detective it gets. Whether or not it created his OCD or it just, perpetuates and enhances it.
With a gun pointed at his head, even though Loy wasn't in the war, Loy does not care. He still kind of makes fun of Otis throughout and says boom a bunch, which is pretty messed up, but also a good character beat. And then next it's cut between Orietta and Ethel. Not a lot of Orietta in this episode, which is kind of sad, but also we have a huge ensemble this season. It's kind of nice to give some characters a break. There is a little Devil Watch, even though Orietta's not in. Yeah, Devil Watch. We're on it. We've been on it since episode 1 and 2. Orietta bangs her head into the opening credits is the only way I can describe that. And it seems obviously annoyed, but also a little demonic. So, like she's possessed by something. We'll see if it goes anywhere, but I just wanted to touch on that. I'd be remiss if I did not talk about Devil Watch, and I think this is the only time today, so there's going to be a lot of edits.
We're getting to the point, we're in episode 5 now, so we're getting to the point where we have less and less room for fat side characters that are less important. And that's not to say that Orietta is not important. Obviously she is. Obviously what happens later in the episode, we start losing people. I thought that this episode did a good job of focusing on the things that we really needed to start to focus on. There's some really good moments for a lot of the key characters that are at war with each other. If we didn't stop to focus on them, I think it would have been a little bit too late. If in episode 8 you pull back the curtain and you start to learn the things about Loy that you learn about in this episode and the way that he behaves and the way that he acts, I would feel like it was a little bit forced. Sidelining Orietta for this episode didn't bother me. Having her just be in that one scene, just as a reminder of like, hey, she's here and she's, a total insane devil, was nice. And like you said, I think that was very well put. She bangs her head into the credits. Like, don't forget about me. Like, I'm still here. Like, I'm still a major X Factor character, but like, we're going to prioritize the stories that need to be prioritized for the overarching piece to really work better going forward.
There is some beginnings of a future arc, or future plot point, I should say, with Ethel contacting Mr. Harvard about Orietta and her past. But after that little bit, Ethel and Thurman have a sweet scene, and it's really interesting. I think Andrew Bird's acting is the worst when he's doing like a genuinely just emotional scene with Ethel. Everything else, he's like really spot on. There's a point later in this episode like I really love. This opening sequence with Ethel was kind of like awkward. It might be brilliant actually. It kind of just sounds like he's faking happiness towards his. I think Andrew Bird's great. It's just a very interesting performance by someone who doesn't really act. He's more of a musician.
Totally agree. I'm glad that we're spotlighting Thurman. Thurman's my guy. It should also be noted that aside from just the performance, he very casually and very plainly says Orietta probably poisoned the pie that she gave us. What? What? How did you come to that conclusion? It's correct, but like, how did you come to that conclusion? Why? And
it wasn't like he was like, you should never see her again. He was just like, yeah, so like you probably shouldn't like hang out with her.
Right, yeah. Yeah, she seems nice and all, but she kind of maybe probably poisoned the pie that got, Swanee feeling sick. But if you gotta hang out with her, I guess that's okay. We're definitely in a pinch for money, so.
So that's the part of the performance I think's weird. But also it's a lot of fun. I really like Thurman as a character, and we keep coming back to him, and he's someone I never expected to talk about a lot this season, and he's been a joy to watch.
Yeah, he's getting a lot more playing time than I expected.
Then Orietta goes through the opening credits, which is nice, and then like a little fun like trio scene opening the episode. It's Milligan, Satchel, and Josto. They're basically just talking about school stuff. They're talking about English and math. Also, I wrote down in my notes, does Mike Milligan know math? Like, is there anything we can connect to Mike Milligan here? Because Satchel was learning long division.
Yeah.
This episode really like reveals characters' motivations with Loy and also Rabbi Milligan. And here Rabbi Milligan, once he's alone and Josto leaves, he's alone with Satchel, and he's like, when the shooting starts, like, we vanish. So it seems like Satchel and Milligan are on the same page, just kind of disappearing. It also just shows that Satchel's just learning a lot from him. I don't necessarily buy their relationship yet, but as we stated before, it's mostly happening off screen.
Overall, I really love this episode. I think it's really strong. There are a couple of points throughout the episode where I wish we had a little bit more to chew on before the scene happens. So this is one of those scenes. I wish we had a full 20-minute sequence just watching Rabbi Milligan and Satchel doing long division and talking about the world and going on chores and errands and some cute little fun relationship stuff that would make you buy this a little bit more. As that scene was playing out, I wrote down, like, Rabbi Milligan is a totally different character when he's talking to Justo in that scene. Really confident and basically saying, like, he basically is telling him what to do. And I was like, this is weird. But then it's revealed that he's kind of playing a character a little bit because all he really cares about is getting out. At this point, it's kind of, it seems like he's kind of rooting for the war, then they can slip out the back door. Tracks really well with his character. I totally agree. I don't quite buy it yet that Satchel and Rabbi Milligan are that connected to each other. We're in episode 5. We're going to be in episode 6 next week. So I think at this point, we just have to buy it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's just a matter of like Noah Hawley being like, there's no way we could get a kid actor to do this subtle character swap that we want to do. So we're just going to mostly do it off screen, and Satchel's not going to have a lot of lines. Like we always say, like it is probably Mike Milligan, but it also is interesting because I think Vanishing is somewhat the antithesis of Mike Milligan, at least the Mike Milligan we know in season 2. He wants to be like the hero of his own story.
I really like him in this scene. There's times in this episode where they just can't help themselves going for jokes with his character. In this scene, he's just like playing it super straight. He's just like, I wasn't good at math, and then he's just asking questions like, what should we do? And he's just playing it straight, and he seems like he just woke up or something. It's kind of just like a weird random scene that he just walks into. But I love the scene. I think it's a good scene. I just wish that we had a little bit more to chew on before it.
Ethel goes over to the hotel that Swanee and Zelmar are at. This family really loves each other. And I think this is also seen here, but it also, as we were mentioning before, showing off characters' motivations, it really dives deep into Swanee and Zelmar's ideologies. They're outlaws, and they reject the game of society that everyone's putting on them, whether that be capitalism or even like going to prison and then bettering yourself. They're just outlaws that want to have fun with their lives. I think that adds a lot of depth to their character. At the end, they're like, what kind of person are you, Ethel? And then she said, well, I'm Ethelrita Pearl Smutney, and I'm one of a kind. Just so awesome. I also kind of fall under the I wish we knew a little more about Ethel, similar to Satchel and Milligan's relationship. And it might be at the point where we're gonna just have to buy, like, Ethel's great. Like, we saw a lot of it in episode 1 and 2. But after that, the last 2 episodes, I feel like we haven't seen too much of Ethel. So that line was just really great. And it really ended the scene well.
Yeah, I think everybody watching kind of smiled. That's such a sweet and endearing moment. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we've talked about this before, Fargo is always hopeful at the end. We've talked about how we think, or at least I think, that it's probably going to end. I mean, it's going to get bloody and dark, but at the end, it's probably going to end with Ethelrita in a hopeful position looking forward. Moments like this are what make all of it really enjoyable. Then just also to talk about the outlaw versus criminal thing, I thought that was a really good Fargo thing. Like, that was a good Fargo scene. All in all, because you get that sweetness at the end, and you also get this really interesting distinction between what an outlaw is and what a criminal is. Like you said, it actually, in one small scene, you know they're outlaws, but it explains it in such a specific way that you're like, yes, that's exactly what I like about them.
They're free, which they say it in the episode, and I wrote down in my notes that they play that ideology perfectly since the beginning. You said they feel like uncaged birds. This is the first scene where Loy really shows some anger because most of his people are in jail. Yeah, he's still angry about the money with Thurman from last week. So it's all kind of stacking up against him. He has an argument with his wife and her mother, I assume it's not Loy's mother. Basically, Loy kind of just puts down his foot and he's like, I built all of this. You do your job, I'm going to do my job. He also has a line real fast where he said, Doc's going to sort it out. Doc's going to, like, fix all this. And it really, like, shows off Loy's ideology, just, like, with, like, him being the man of the house, but also his right-hand man and the person that helps him with his problems is not his wife or his mother-in-law, but it's Dr. Senator.
I think this was such an important scene. And he's in a lot more after this also, and all of it's so critically important because for me, I was waiting for Loy to become like the the sort of hero of the story, somebody that we get behind. But this episode shows us he's not. He's about two things, money and winning. And he's kind of a dick to his wife in this scene. And he, to the point where he's like, go get me some fucking coffee. And he gets really worked up. And then later in the episode, he starts to do things that are just classic gangster shit. He's not a good guy. It's kind of always been there. He just hasn't had a moment where he could fly off the rails. So far, he's been right about everything, and there hasn't been a reason to get really worked up. But now that he's getting worked up, we're seeing who he actually is. It's taken us until episode 5 to really get a sense of that, but he is an anti-hero. He's not the good guy in this story, which makes me super excited going forward because now we're starting to figure out like how this is all going to align. I'm not necessarily rooting for the cannons now.
Okay, and then we go to the jail house where all the cannons are being kept. And one of the cannons is actually eating like a ham sandwich. Kind of funny, because just like in general, like the classic jail food. I mean, what I learned when I was little was ham sandwiches. Like my sister famously said, when a cop pulled over my dad, she said, "Please don't put my dad in jail and make him eat ham sandwiches." And then the cop laughed, of course, and then did not give my dad a ticket. As we all know, in the famous pullover of my dad in 2005. That was a fun detail, and there was a lot of Leon hate going on. Everyone's like, damn, Leon, this is all your fault. I have a comment on Josto when Jason Schwartzman is acting kind of tough. I feel like he's kind of has the same vibe that Tobias Funke has.
Also turned out to be ill-conceived.
Hey, Fazellas. Looks like you guys are up to no good. Well, this gang used to be like that 2, 3, 4. So you think you're tough? Well, we hate rapping. But don't bust a cap-in, because here's what's happening. We're breaking out some old-fashioned tap-in.
Hey, look at Chris, there's a new gang in town.
Oh, I was shot! We miscalculated! Retreat!
Quick, switch to volley! It's not gonna help!
Meanwhile,
I feel like Josto kind of falls under that when he's acting serious. I like realized it when I was watching it. I'm like, that's what he reminds me of. A man out of his element. But yeah, and he says something really interesting that I don't personally agree with, but I think in the 1950s, it was very spot on. He said, we root for the taker, basically what Josto's saying he's doing. And he's the hero of this story. And all the cannons, because of the color of their skin, they don't get that luxury. Because as a white man in America, you can take what you want and people will love you. But as a black man, you can't do that. And I thought that ideology was super, super interesting.
Yeah, this scene was interesting for several reasons. We got a bunch of good scenes back to back to back in this sort of section. First of all, I thought it was good to have a scene with the Cannon crew just talking about things. There's like you said, there's a little Leon hate. There's a little bit of questioning Loy at one point. There's just an opportunity for them to speak, which they haven't really had much yet. So more scenes with them would be fantastic. Then we get the line that's been playing throughout the commercials like so much, like America Loves a Crime Story thing. I think to your point, it doesn't totally track. I think his point is like in the 1950s, like America values go-getters and people who take things, and I get that. But in the analogy of like a crime story, it's sort of an imperfect analogy. We don't root for the taker. I don't think we ever have rooted for the taker, but we're super interested in the taker. We are so interested in Lorne Malvo in season 1 because he just does what he wants. But we're not rooting for Lorne Malvo. We're rooting for Allison Tolman. There were questionable performance things for a lot of different characters or actors, where now we're like so deep into it, I'm starting to sit back and go, are we still doing this? Like with Gaetano and his eyes and some of the eccentricities that he has, they're getting bigger and crazier. With Schwartzman, we're still, every opportunity to have a joke, like they're still going for it. And some of it's landing, some of it's not. The ga with the machine gun thing, it was just like, okay, like I think the point, the character is strong. I just think that there was a miscommunication, and I don't think Schwartzman's bad in this season. I love Schwartzman, and I think he's doing a good job, but I just think that there's a miscommunication between the directors of this season, between Holly and some of the actors in the season. I feel like it should be more awkward than anything. Like, we should be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, instead of like, ha ha ha. Like, they're playing it for laughs instead of for awkwardness. Or
It's that tough line that I think Martin Freeman walked really well. And Jason Schwartzman's not exactly doing that this season. But yeah, and he also says an interesting line at the end. He basically says, it's time to surrender. And Milligan's just basically like, so like, what do you guys think Loy's gonna do? And it's just like, they're like, fuck off, dude. And he's like, okay, but like, come on. Like, Satchel and I are like really cool friends and I take care of him, so. And then they're all like, then just take him home. And he's like, all right, whatever. Like, I'm not getting anything from you.
yeah, at the end, he's even like, okay, but you're all going to die, so. Like, what? It's sort of weird.
Then we get a fun scene with a couple people. I really like Otis and Deffy's dynamic this season. And this scene's interesting. I feel like we just learn more about Otis. Again, we were talking about the detective tropes, and he has a long lost love that died. And on his, it's like, it's such a cliche to say, but like on his worst day imaginable, like in the war, like when he killed his general, like his girlfriend, he got the message that his girlfriend also died that day. So he just laid in the grass for 3.5 hours and looked up at the clouds. And even, this isn't like funny, but like, I just think it's such like a cliche that it is kind of goofy. And also at one point he just goes like, I just stared at the clouds for like 3 hours and they look different in France. You know, I think.
And then he asks him, like, how do they look different? And he's like, I don't know, they're French or something.
Yeah, just a great play. I really like Otis because I think he's a great play on the war veteran detective trope because he has a bunch of weird quirks and he's also just like a horrible person.
Totally. You know, this scene for me was a mixed bag because I think it speaks to some of the issues that the season's having overall, just like tonally finding itself. I wish that they hadn't gone so dramatic with the backstory for Otis, and he gets this really big dramatic moment, and it's really sad. And I was like, all right, that's fine and all, but I just wish that we didn't have to go through this right now. I do like that Deffy is just kind of bothering Otis constantly. That's a fun little relationship. I like that Otis is being pulled in a million different directions and he's just like not into it. He just wants to be alone. But again, one of the issues I had with the scene was they keep putting hats on hats. They just keep putting hats on hats. Now he has like a little collection of these little dolls. Like, how many quirks can a character have? Like, it's getting ridiculous at this point.
Okay, so next scene, Gaetano and Calamita go to a bar, and it's a pretty good start to the scene too. Gaetano, like you were saying, like they keep putting hats on hats. Like now Gaetano like loves to dance, like, and then he slips and falls, and then just like a young like barkeep like laughs at him. And I wrote in my notes, Gaetano is so weird. Like staring down this kid, and he's like, do you know why I hate America? Like he keeps talking about how he hates America so much, which is an interesting juxtaposition with Josto, because Josto this episode was talking about how great America is and how like he as an American can like gain power whenever he wants. And then Gaetano is talking about how America sucks because everyone thinks they can become president and like the coffee is shit. And it like kind of builds up to Gaetano killing the bartender and the young barkeep. And Calamita is just like, why'd you do that? And then he's like, shh, shh. And then he like starts dancing. Yeah, I like Gaetano a lot. He's definitely weird. But I just love how weird this season is. And he is kind of a perfect encapsulation about this season.
Half of Gaetano's lines are like really fun and funny and cool and strange. And then half of them are just like, I lived in Italy. Like that's kind of the extent of his conversations. I do just want to emphasize, you mentioned the everyone wants to be president line. Specifically, he says, your Jesus looks like a lady and everyone wants to be president. And those are the things that are wrong with America. I love that. That's such a great line. He had, when he was calling his brother a pussy in episode 3 or 4, whichever one that was a similar one. He was kind of just like, he was musing for a little bit, and then he's like, you are acting like a pussy. Like, he has like funny little lines like that. And I thought this was a really funny line. But before they get into the bar, I liked when he slipped. I actually thought that was funny. Like, it was a totally slapstick moment, but I thought it was funny. It actually caught me by surprise, even though I've seen it in the trailer or in the commercials like a million times. I didn't realize it was Caetano. But then when he hops up and he does the little, oh, Charlie Chaplin thing, I was like, okay, we get it. He's crazy. He's an insane person. Like, he's flipping his switch again. So then he goes inside and, like you said, he kills these two people. That's another sort of a moment where I just feel like we need to ramp this up a little bit more slowly.
Like, I think there should have just been a scene earlier. Like, this is such like a simple thing that could have just made the scene even more powerful. Like, if he was just in a bar earlier, which he was in like 2 episodes ago with all the boys, but there were some people that were bugging him and he was like super close to like snapping, but he doesn't. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then the second time around, you're like, oh, it's going to be the same thing. He doesn't. And then he kills them, you know?
I think it's because I think he needs like a real trigger. But he gets more angry than he would in other situations. Maybe he has a complex about that, about being laughed at. Or maybe he has a complex about being the little brother, or, you know, whatever it is. Just yeah, like you said, just add another scene or two and add that trigger into those scenes, and then it would be more clear that this really, really pissed him off.
Yeah, I feel like a perfect example of something we're talking about that they do really well in another season is in season 2 with that gas station owner. He talks to Ed earlier, and then later he talks to Hansi, and then another time he sees Hansi coming back, so he calls 911, and then Hansi kills him. Like, I feel like I knew that character, even though I didn't at all. Like, it was just like, oh, wow, like, Hansi's, like, off the rails now.
Totally, yeah. And I just want to emphasize that, like, I'm definitely being a little bit more critical about this episode, even though at the top I said I really loved the episode. None of the issues I've had with the season have prevented me from enjoying the season. It's just, I think, preventing the season from being the highest level that it can be. But again, I'm not enjoying it. I'm having a great time watching it, and any of these little things, it's just preventing the story from being airtight and
right.
Perfect, at least as perfect as it can be.
And I think something we agree upon with the last 3 seasons is that Fargo is a perfect show. There aren't really things that you can like dissect. Like, there's no like little coil that you can pull and then everything unravels. So next, I call it the Smutny birthday party. Debril and Thurman have a fun scene, and then something I didn't expect that it just like really shows the kind of initiative Loy has right now. Loy and Zero come to visit Thurman and Debril, and it is a very intense scene, a scene where I really thought Thurman was going to die again. I think the biggest thing is Loy's kind of done, so he's just taking the Smutny's mortuary. It's his now. Simple as that. And there's a really sweet moment where I think Andrew Bird plays this super well. Loy takes over the business, and then Andrew Bird's like, I didn't know. Like, he doesn't realize all the shit he got himself into by like taking a loan out from the Cannons. It's just a really sad moment, and also so Fargo.
Again, Loy gets an opportunity to be a bit of a dick and kind of cement himself as something for the first time. He has the line in this scene that he says, "I will do whatever it takes to win." And does that remind you of anybody? Mike Milligan? I mean, it runs in the blood.
Also reminds me of Kenny in that one sketch I wrote.
Isn't this still about the channel? I don't care about that anymore. I just want to win. That's what this is all about. I'm not a loser.
Totally. And I do hope that at some point, I hope that when When Loy is dying, I hope he has a moment to realize that he's been chasing the wrong thing, so intensely determined to win, or at least when he loses, I hope that he has a moment where we can see him recognize that he's lost it.
Right. And I think Mike Milligan definitely has that moment in season 2. All right, so then Ethel's back in school. A nice surprising scene with Defi and Ethel. Just a strange duo I thought I would really never see interact. Pretty much like respects her and just is basically saying like, I want to know where your aunt is, and if you don't tell me, then I'm gonna, get you expelled from this school. And it kind of also shows Defi has kind of like a Loy mentality.
Again, Oliphant is just really good as an actor, but also just as an actor in Fargo. I feel like he, more than just the character, I think he as a performer knows how to get just right down to it, just to the bare bones of like what the scene is about. He respects her intelligence. I think a way to say it is he respects her intelligence despite her race. He's definitely a racist, but he definitely sees something that he can connect to despite the racial difference that he sees. And that one thing is her clear intelligence. And to the point of what her decision is, it's funny because it's consistent with Thurman and DeBril earlier with Loy, because Loy gives them the same situation. It's like, you're going to tell me where your sister is, or I'm going to kill Thurman in this kitchen right now. And then when faced with the same thing, like turn in your aunt, or, you're going to be in trouble, you're going to be expelled, Ethelreda does the same thing. They both give up the information.
Breaking your hopes and dreams or giving up a relative. And that's where the love stops, it would seem. Then Leon and company get out of prison.
Just that the music and the pace that starts to develop in the last couple of scenes really starts to pick up, and the end, this portion of the episode is really propulsive, and something that Fargo is so good at is being propulsive. Whenever a camera is tracking with a character from behind, and the music picks up and you know that they're about to drive somewhere to do a thing, it's like, oh, here we go. And you know that there's another character who's going to drive to the same place to do that same thing. It's exciting. It's really fun. So yeah, it was sort of just building up the anticipation of what was then about to happen.
Yeah, this next scene's great because, Oliphant's on his way, and then Loy gets there first to Zelmar and Swanee. Then the final scene, or second to final scene, kind of final scene, final sequence, I would say. Calamita and Gaetano are in the cafe, and Dr. Senator comes in. It's interesting because I did say last week that I fear that Dr. Senator will get stuck in the cafe, and unfortunately, most of his scenes this season are in the cafe. I think this is his third scene in a row, but I think the cafe is shot really differently. It's bleak. There's no customers around. Dr. Senator is sitting in the other seat. He's sitting where Ebel usually sits, which is interesting, and Calamita's on the other side. Calamita just starts talking, and then Gaetano's eating, he's horribly eating a sundae in the background. He keeps putting nuts on it, and then also chocolate syrup, and then he keeps eating it slowly, but it's still all there, throughout the whole scene. I don't know, it's pretty fucked up. Honestly, probably the most fucked up thing Gaetano does this episode.
That's devil watch right there.
Yeah, maybe that Sunday's possessed by the devil. And they keep talking about a human baby in a box, and I think that's just a very interesting image that also calls back to just classical literature, like the Odyssey, and just things where people just find these babies in boxes, and they always become these great symbols or heroes or something. It's very interesting. And then he says something later on, because Calamita's I'm done talking, but he just keeps talking, and Dr. Senator says, "You said you were done talking, then you kept talking." I think he really just owns Calamita and Gaetano. And he also says, You're just boys making a mess, and someone's gonna have to clean up that mess one day. I never thought of them like that, but like they really are just like schoolyard bullies that are trying to get their way. Dr. Senator, and it's like a medium shot, so you can see like some of the cafe, but you can't see like the main door, and all you hear is the door opening and the bells ringing. He like immediately knows he's outside, and he's like about to grab his gun, and then Calamita is faster, and he just kills him right there. And yeah, it's a tough scene, and then I'll just like finish off the sequence too, and then it does like a nice time jump where Loy comes to find Dr. Senator dead. He doesn't deserve this. He like deserves to be buried. He doesn't deserve just to be like dead on like a cold ground. But they go away, and the lights go off, and the episode ends. And a really tragic end for a character really held Loy together, and or it really shifts the whole season, and Dr. Senator's death really does this.
Dr. Senator's death is for the plot important, but it also felt important. I finally got the sense that now a war can really be waged. Like, this is the thing that now shoots us into the back half of the season and really creates the propulsive conclusion that we've been waiting for. Like you said, Dr. Senator is basically the rails, and Loy is the train. And now that Dr. Senator is gone, like, who knows what's going to happen with Loy? Because, I mean, in this episode, Loy already started to demonstrate some questionable leadership moments and some just general dickishness. And without his right-hand man, he's probably going to make some mistakes now going forward. This whole sequence, I think, I mean, right when Dr. Senator walks in and he realizes he's not meeting with who he thought he was going to meet with, there's like a good pause. And I think he knows, and we know, that there's about a 90% chance he's not going to make it out of this episode alive. Because I felt that way, and well, also because we have talked about before, we thought he was going to die in the season. But because going into the scene, I didn't think he was coming out of it, I feel like every moment was totally savored. It was a really great Dr. Senator scene. Moment was really purposeful. Every line that he had felt like he knew that this could be a defining moment for his character, because it was probably going to be one of the final moments for his character. He gets in some quips, owns Calamita and Gaetano, and he goes out like a champ. And it's a bummer that we're not going to get more Dr. Senator. His death, I feel like, serves a greater purpose to the story than him being alive, certainly. Now it's clear Loy is very upset. In that last moment, I thought that was the best performance that Chris Rock has given so far. It's just a look. He's just looking at his friend who's dead, his father figure, a mentor, somebody that co-created credit cards with him. Yeah, he's just looking over his body, and he's really hurt by this, in a way that he wasn't hurt by his son getting arrested, or, you know, even the attempted assassination of his son. He was upset. He was more upset because of what it meant for the political situation between the two families.
And just so we know, we've always said the actor who plays Dr. Senator, but his name is Glenn Turman, and he did a fantastic job this season. Yeah, he was just a joy to watch in these first 5 episodes.
He's clearly an actor that is uber talented. I hope we see more from him.
Yeah. And it is interesting to see this season kills off the father figure. Yeah, Glenn Turman, a great performance, and hope to see more of him.
Well, the ah heck moment is, as defined very clearly by us, by a tribunal of Fargo heads, it's the most Fargo moment. And I mean, it's tough because there's a bunch of moments. We mentioned the scene with Thurman, where he's like actually realizing the gravity of the situation, which, like you said, is super Fargo. There's also the cross-cutting of Deafy trying to get to Zelmar and Swanee while Loy ends up getting in there. That's like really Fargo. I think I'm gonna go with Dr. Senator's final scene though, just because it does feel it seems like a really classic Fargo scene to me. It has really funny moments. It has monologues. It has a death, and it has the promise of a really big consequence. So not a fun ah heck moment this week, but I think as defined by us, I think it's a very Fargo scene.
Definitely. And just to contrast, my ah heck moment is Gaetano falling on his ass when he was dancing. If we were like thinking about episodes that really changed the game of this season, it's gonna definitely be this episode. So I'm just curious if some of our predictions changed. Off the top of my head, since we were just talking about Dr. Senator, I think Loy is gonna make a lot of moves coming up now, and I don't know if all of them are gonna be smart, but he's definitely gonna not sit back anymore, and he's gonna start either making mistakes or making really bold decisions. Gonna try to blackmail Otis as well, which their relationship started this week. And yeah, I feel like that's something we didn't really touch on. So I'm interested to see where Loy goes, and of course the other canons, like if Lemuel's still in danger or not.
Yeah, he's definitely gonna start making big mistakes. That's got to be where this goes. He outlined his philosophy in this episode. He's gonna do whatever it takes to win. That's why mistakes will get made, is because he's not gonna have a level head about any of it. He's gonna purely be going in for revenge.
I feel like Josto's whole ideology this episode was just to scare the cannons away, not to like murder anyone or kill anyone, just like rough up a few heads, you know? But Gaetano and Calamita made a huge play this week. Definitely see Gaetano or Josto dying in the next 2 episodes. That's like my prediction for the Fadas.
Yeah, and Justo also made it very clear that, I mean, he's not really that bad of a leader. Like he's not like he's a silly goose, but he isn't making, I guess just like Loy, up to this point he's not made really terrible decisions yet, with a few exceptions. But in this episode he even says, I just want Gaetano out of here. Like I don't, if we avoid war, then there's no reason for him to be here. Fully works because there's a little bit of infighting with the cannons now. Probably going to be a lot actually in next episode because of Dr. Senator's death, and there's going to be disagreements about how they go forward. But there's tons of infighting with the Fadas right now. I'm curious if the infighting stops and leaders are established and then they go fully to war and then they both kill each other, or if the infighting continues while the war is happening and everyone's just getting massacred left and right. Like, does Gaetano kill Josto next episode and then say, okay, now we're fully at war?
Milligan and Satchel, I feel like they might just vanish.
Actually, I would really like that if, I mean, I wanted Milligan to be what they're now setting up Otis to be. Otis is sort of that middle piece that's being tugged in both directions. All season long, I was just hopeful that that Milligan was going to be the one being tugged in all directions. I thought that would have been really cool. But it would also be very Fargo if next episode those two characters leave and then they're gone for episode 7, gone for episode 8, and then they show up in 9 and 10, and they have some sort of weird role to play in the end of the war.
Because I think there's a side of Milligan that really does genuinely want to protect Satchel.
It's also implied just because of the connection that they share by being both traded. Why Rabbi Milligan cares about the kid, but I just wish there was more that we could see. But yeah, here's my big question about the Smutneys. Is Ethelrita the linchpin of this whole conclusion? Because she now has a foot in the door of Orietta and by extension the Fada family, and now has a foot in the other door of the Cannons, and that one is like even more close to home now because their home is literally the cannons now. So I'm curious if the season is going to lead to Ethelreda somehow, just by being tangentially connected to both parties, somehow takes them down.
Yeah, what if even Ethelreda is the only victim, as in she's the only one that really dies out of our main cast? That would be interesting.
That would be really tragic, but I think that would be really, really powerful if because we've been saying all along, like, this is gonna be the bloodiest season, like this could be this massive war between these two. What if we never get the war, and instead this beautiful, intelligent, young African-American girl in 1950s Kansas City, Missouri, tragically catches a bullet in the side? Like, that would be pretty powerful. Because also it's also, she starts the season off by talking about history and who is remembered and who gets to write history, and it would be really, really sad, but also accurate to history if she was, wiped completely out of the pages.
Should be a crazy end either way. And I think we talked about how typically it ends nicely, but maybe this season's different.
Well, our predictions last week kind of extend beyond this week and go into next week, because our predictions last week were basically that she's going to poison the macaroon for Dr. Harvard, and she's going to get further involved with Justo and probably going to get him all coked up, and he's probably going to start making wild decisions. So, I mean, it's the same prediction, I guess, but just for next week, because, Orietta didn't have a chance to do anything this week. Because we've talked about how Ethelreda and Orietta's storyline is basically like a horror film. It's like a very creepy Jordan Peele racial thriller. And I'm curious. I'm curious if that's gonna continue to be the case. Like, is that how that's gonna end? Like, is her story less actually going to be involved with Fada and more involved with Ethelreda?
No, I mean, that I think that's an important thing to bring up, because we're all on the Josto Orietta train, the Jorietta train, or the Osto train. Osto Fayflower. That I feel like we forget that one of the first interactions that Orietta had was with Ethelreda, and the continual return of that is typically in horror movie fashion. So we will see where that goes. Again, I feel like this episode really put her on the sidelines, but it's really important to remember that she is definitely a wild card and could add a lot of layers, whether that is handling Harvard or even Gaetano. So, because if we saw anything this week, Gaetano loves his sweets.
That's actually a really great point, and I kind of hope that they turn into that a little bit, because Gaetano's a big man. He likes his sweets. He likes good food, well-crafted food. So maybe Orietta slips him a little pie. Maybe Orietta slips Dr. Harvard the poisoned macaroon, and then Schwartzman starts getting coked up again and thinking, wait a second, we could just do this to all of our enemies.
No, certainly not. I mean, we're already halfway done. Something about Fargo second halves, they do not have breathing room. So it will be certainly interesting to see. And also, any predictions about Zombie Man?
Oh, yeah, no, I'm going to go ahead and boldly predict at least 2 more Zombie Man cameos. If they're going to give me Zombie Man, give me Zombie Man,
Only time will tell. And we'll have to wait another week where certainly a lot more will happen. A lot happened this week, and we're 50% done with this season, and I'm super excited to see where it goes. Again, huge shout out to Glenn Turman for the fantastic performance as Dr. Senator. Hopefully we'll see a flashback with him later on, or his twin brother comes into town. Either way, Fargo is back, and it is really incredible this season, and I can't wait to see some more.